Welcome back, guys. Today's episode, I am sharing 10 true Appalachian horror stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin.
Most people remember Kennecott as a picturesque ghost town now swallowed gently by Wrangell St. Elias, preserved for visitors with cameras slung around their necks. But when I speak its name, I don't think of pretty red mill buildings framed by snow peaks. No, for me, Kennecott reeks of sweat and copper, of friends broken by rock falls, of the mountain claiming lives whenever it decided the cost of copper was too low. Was a copper miner there in the 1930s? Young, tougher than I thought, and more foolish than I knew. When the Minnesota Syndicate pulled out and shut the mine in '38, Kennecott began its slow death, the red mill stripped of use, rails left to rust. By the 1950s, only the wind threaded through its carcass. I didn't return until 1997. By then, my hair was white and my lungs carried dust enough to remind me of every ton of rock I'd ever shoveled. My wife thought I was crazy to go back. Those mountains already tried to kill you once, she said. Maybe she was right. But I needed to see it, to stand where the younger me had spent my bones. Call it nostalgia or a reckoning, the day was brutally still. No ravens, no creak of trees under snow. My boots broke through silence step by step as I wandered past collapsed houses, their roofs bent into frozen supplications. That quiet was heavy, the kind of silence that pinches the inside of your ears, and then, out of that silence, clang, my heart stopped. I knew that sound better than the sound of my name. The alarm bell, back in the day, they hung those bells deep in the shafts. If gas leaked, if the timbers gave way, if dynamite was about to blow, they rang the bells. Sharp metal, cutting straight into a miner's spine. It was the one sound that could end conversations mid-word. Make men drop tools and run, but those bells had been stripped decades ago. Dismantled with everything else, clang, 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 again steady, certain, echoing. 3 strikes, the old code for a collapse warning. I froze, every instinct inside me sparking like live wire. The rational explanation may be wind, work through loose tin, but deep down I knew better. The mountain was ringing its warning long after the last miner had left. And it wasn't done yet. That clang pulled at me like a hook. Against reason, I found myself pushing deeper toward the main shaft, where the noise rolled up the dark throat of the mountain. Toward the place where the bells were still screaming, the yard in front of the main shaft was almost untouched by snow, which was wrong. Every other corner of Kennecott swallowed drifts high as my chest. But here, the earth was clean and pressed. Like something or many things moved through often enough to keep the snow from resting, chains once barred the entrance. But the lock was nothing more than a rust-bitten coil now hanging loose. Something had shoved the gate open hard enough that its bolts bent wide against stone. It yawned, waiting for me. Inside was a breath of old earth-wet stone, dust. And above all, copper. Sharp and metallic, coating my tongue like pennies crushed between my teeth. Instantly I was back in those tunnels, 20 years old, swinging a pick, half blind with sweat. My lungs tightened in memory. My flashlight beam swept rails where carts once rattled. Some buckets still sat frozen mid-line, as if the men pushing them vanished mid-shift. Helmets lay cradled in dirt. I stepped slowly, boots crunching rock chips, each noise bouncing walls of silence back at me. Then came the light. At first, a faint orange flicker at the end of a shaft, and I told myself it was my beam hitting quartz. But the light swayed. It wavered. It multiplied into 2, then 3, then nearly a dozen glowing specks stretched down the tunnel. Helmet lamps. Carbide Lampstead technology. They looked freshly lit, burning steady when they should have died 60 years ago. My chest thudded. I wasn't alone. The noises followed soon after. My own footsteps doubled, paced by another pair behind me, but never catching up. Gooseflesh prickled my arms. I swung the light back, quick beam stabbing the path I'd just walked. Empty, that's when the scrape started. Metal dragged against stone, slow and deliberate. One drag, then another. Then it multiplied. Multiple tools pulling across rock in unison until sparks bit the dark. The bells answered Dot from deeper still. They rang not a single clang but dozens firing off like a mad chorus. Codes overlapping, collapse warnings mixing with fire signals. No rhythm like that belonged in the world of men. My eardrums screamed under the weight of it, and yet I knew the mountain wasn't finished. I pushed deeper, trembling but unable to stop. My light picked up something ahead. A figure, helmet gleaming, shoulders bent, moving toward me with stiff precision. Boots crashing like metal striking metal with every step. I froze where I stood. I wanted to shout out, maybe some fool explorer had wandered in, or maybe some park ranger. The words never left my throat. My beam crept slowly upward, tracing the figure as it jerked closer. He was a miner. At least shaped like one. Helmet lamp burning bright into my eyes. His boots clanged against rail, striking sparks. His limbs twitched like a marionette pulled too taut. With every lurch forward, I caught pieces of his face, eyes white. Pure white. No color, no pupils. His skin was crusted, layered in scabs of rust, flaking like metal eaten alive. His jaw opened and shut with that clicking sound. His cheekbones shimmered as if lined with ore veins. Dot behind him. More figures crawled out of the dark. Helmet after helmet igniting, dozens, then more. Their shapes bled in and out of one another until the entire shaft pulsed with a staggering, unnatural glow. The sound. Oh God, the sound. Pickaxes clanged in unison, hundreds of invisible blows raining down stone. My chest rattled under it. My ears filled with molten noise until blood coursed down my neck. The walls convulsed, faces pressing out as though the very rock remembered who it consumed. Mouths gaped in eternal scream, eyes stretched wide, rock giving half-birth to men it had buried and never released, and the bells shrieked overhead, ceaseless, collapse here, collapse there. No collapse came. Just the warning, frozen on repeat forever. The lead figure raised its axe overhead, and instinct dropped me to my knees. I clawed backward, nails peeling against timber. I felt iron fingers clamp my shoulder, cold enough to rip my breath, and then silence. When I opened my eyes again, snow burned my cheeks. I was outside. Dawn spilled weak light across the peaks. My flashlight lay dead 15 feet from me. My coat crusted red with copper dust. I staggered up, ears still ringing faintly. The shaft mouth stood before me, clogged with new drift, sealed like it hadn't yawned open in decades. No footprints, not even my own. I left Kennecott that moment, stumbling until the road carried me away from the red mill and the mountain's throat. But nights since, the mountain hasn't left me. When storms hollow down valleys and winter finds the eaves of my home, I still hear them, one clang, then another, then hundreds screaming together. Steel forever beating rock. People call ghost towns empty. They're wrong. Some towns aren't abandoned. Some are just still working their shift underground. Forever. And Kennecott's bells will keep tolling until the mountain has every last miner back. Including me. My grandfather wasn't the type to tell ghost stories for amusement. He was a fisherman, a stern man hardened by storms and salt. The kind who could gut halibut one-handed while steering with the other. He didn't scare easy. But there was one thing he never laughed about. Portlock. Portlock was a cannery village on Alaska's jagged southern coast. Built for the salmon rush, it should have thrived like nearby towns. Instead, it emptied in the 1950s, houses left as if people walked out mid-meal. Official stories blamed fish shortages or hard economics. My grandfather said otherwise. He told me of men who vanished in the woods, their bodies never found. He told me of others who were found but torn apart, as though by something that wasn't hungry so much as hateful. Not bear, not Wolf, he muttered once, staring at a cigarette that burned down to his fingers. Something out there wanted them gone. Everyone left. They abandoned boats at shore, nets still drying, even chickens in coops. It was a whole community running without looking back. I didn't listen. When you grow up around warnings that sound more like legends than lessons, you shrug them off. Young men always think they're braver than their fathers. In 2003, I had my chance to prove him wrong. I'd been fishing the Kenai and heard other crews joke about the cursed port. Curiosity dug into me like a hook. With two friends, I motored a skiff along that coastline, gnarled spruce pressing sharp against mist, cliffs like black teeth, the sea restless around us. Eventually, we spotted the old cannery skeleton still standing against the tide. Half its frame listed, timbers blackened by decades of storms, but still jutting like ribs. When we landed, the air hit me wrong. Not the crisp tang of ocean. No, it was thick, damp, with a sweetness gone bad. Like blood kept too long in salt water. Stranger still, the seabirds were gone. Any Alaskan fisherman will tell you, gulls never abandon a coast. But here the sky was empty. My friends stayed near the beach to unload gear, laughing to mask nerves. I wandered inland. Curiosity, maybe stupidity. Past collapsed storefronts and sagging cabins swallowed by alder. The forest pressed close, faster here than anywhere else, as if eager to smother human traces, and that was when I saw the dock. Just a leg of it still jutted into black water, its posts scarred deep. Gouges raked along them, long, deliberate claw marks, each curve pressed like steel through wood. Not storm damage, not man-made. It shook me, but not enough to turn me. That night I pitched my small tent just outside the cannery ruins while my friends slept on the skiff. The fog rolled in off the sea thick as wool, and that's when it began. The first rock struck the nylon soft, a playful plink. Then another. Then larger, violent blows. My pulse rocketed. I unzipped a crack and shouted to the fog, but it ate my voice whole. No answer. Then came the footsteps, circling, slow, deliberate, too heavy to belong to any man. At first, I swore there were 2 or 3 sets of steps pacing around me, but as my ears settled, I realized it was only one. A single presence, moving with patience, as if testing how close it could come before I broke. I slipped my flashlight from the pack and shoved open the flap. The soil was damp, soft enough to hold tracks. My circle of light fell instantly on them. Footprints, but they weren't human. Each one was nearly double the length of mine. Easily 18 inches, pressed so deep the soil swelled around the heel. Toes stretched broad, no boots, no claws. But weighty, enormous weight had driven them in. The stench came next. A rank fog rolled with it, pungent and suffocating. Think salmon heads left in a bin for weeks, mixed with musk so dense it clogged the throat. My eyes watered. My skin prickled, then I heard it. Breathing. Mine. Not steady either. Ragged, guttural, like a creature struggling between rage and restraint. In and out with force enough to shake the air. My frozen arm lifted the flashlight and swept the trees. I shouldn't have looked. There it stood, partly veiled but real enough for nightmares to know shape. Massive, shoulders like a moose. Chest broad, arms dragging longer than any man's should. Its head was conical, sloped at the top, the silhouette all wrong. And the eyes, the beam caught them for just a blink. Dull red, glowing like embers deeper than fire, reflecting with intent. The instant the light brushed its face, the rock throwing started again. Sharp, controlled, not random. The projectiles smacked dirt and canvas with precision. Not animal instinct, something intelligent. I ducked back inside. My heartbeat smashing so hard it felt like it rattled the tent poles. My rational mind burned nonsense. Was it a hoax, some monster suit? Was somebody deliberately scaring me? But the smell alone carved through that fantasy. No man carried that stench inside his skin. The breathing drew closer. Heavy footfalls pressed the ground in rhythm. Snap, snap, branches breaking but never clumsy, always purposeful. Every sound wrapped around the tent like a predator circling prey. I risked another flash from the beam. This time, it wasn't just standing there. It was dragging something, long and limp, its outline unmistakably human, though the fog swirled hungrily across the shape. Each movement left a dark streak against moss, a wet drag staining earth. My stomach dropped, sick certainty coiling inside me, whether corpse or captive. That bundle had once been a person. That sight shattered me. The fear that had paralyzed me cracked into instinct. I tore the zipper down, bolted past the ruins, half blind in fog. lungs splitting raw from sucking too much cold air. I ran for my life. I don't remember the forest between me and the beach. Only branches snapping against my arms, the throb in my skull, and the horrifying awareness that every time my boots hit mud, another colossal stride echoed after. It wasn't running. It didn't need speed. It followed with a hunter's certainty, letting me drown myself in fear. Then came the whistle, not a song, not a man's call. Two tones, hollow and sharp, weaving through fog like a knife. Almost playful. I thought of dog handlers whistling for their hounds. But this sound was older, stranger, and every note chased my legs faster. At last, the brake trees falling away to the hard black line of beach. My friends jolted awake at the crashing I made. Their laughter slipped into stunned silence when they saw my face. I tried to stammer the words, but breath came only in gasps, eyes burning, lungs clawing for air. All I managed was, "We have to go." Before they could fight me, the first light glowed behind me. Lanterns in the abandoned houses lining the ghost shore. Yellow light flickered alive. One by one, window frames blazed like homes never emptied. The glow spread until a dozen shacks were occupied. And with it, silence throbbed like a second skin. The waves against our boat, that constant slap of water on hull stilled. No sound remained but my pulse, then just as perfectly. Every lantern blinked out. Something still stood at the tree line, a silhouette enormous against fog, watching. I swear in its grip still dangled what it had dragged. My friends saw it too. That was all the proof we needed. We shoved off quick, boat scraping rock until black water swallowed us. Arms rode without stopping. None of us dared speak. We paddled until the coastline was gone and exhaustion pulled us white with shivering. Only then did voices croak curses and prayers into the sea air. I've never returned to Portlock. Some still claim the stories are exaggeration. Campfire ghost tales spun too long, but my grandfather's words bite cleaner than ever. Portlock didn't die. It was driven out. Some things followed us out, that's why we never went back. 50 years ago, an entire town vanished. They were smart. They listened to the warnings. I wasn't smart. I wandered in. And though I left breathing, part of me never escaped, because ghost towns aren't always empty. Sometimes they're still occupied by something that never wanted you there and never will. I'd been on the Chilkoot Trail for 3 grueling days, my legs aching and my lungs stiff with Alaskan frost. When I came down into Daya, few know it anymore. But Daya was once destined to be the great bone, yard of fortune seekers. The Four Skagway seized the spotlight during their Klondike gold rush. It was Daya dusty docks, canvas tents, trails stamped flat by thousands lusting after gold. And just as quickly as it bloomed, it rotted. Skagway got the railroad, Daya couldn't keep up, and the land reclaimed what man tried to stake out. Today the maps call it a historic park, but anyone who's walked there knows it isn't history. It's bones of a town swallowed by rot. Roots pry through cabins. Olda devours fallen timbers. The cemetery has all but disappeared beneath moss. That afternoon, I was exhausted enough to camp anywhere, even among those ruins. But through the timberline I saw something I couldn't reconcile with history, a building. Not broken, not sunken, not skeletal. Standing proud. Its white paint clung fresh against rough boards. A porch spanned across its face. A hanging sign etched clearly, moving faintly in the breeze. The Chilkoot Hotel. My jaw split wide as I tried to tell myself it was some reconstruction. But I had studied the maps and the Park Service reports. No structure stood in Daya like that. No hotel remained. Curiosity dragged me closer. Windows glowed faint with lamplight. I heard the faint creak of rocking chairs on the porch, like boardwalk timbers flexing beneath invisible weight. No birds sang. The forest stopped breathing. Then the front door lifted open easily, as though waiting. Inside I found warm lamplight glowing against floral wallpaper, patterned carpets, polished banisters. A register sat at the reception desk. Behind it, a woman smiled, a woman dressed in pioneer-era clothes. Her hair pinned under a bonnet, her skin pale as flour but smooth with vitality. Been a while since we had a guest, she said pleasantly, voice lilting as though she had been rehearsing those words for decades. You look tired, traveler. We still keep the rooms ready for weary legs. Every instinct should have howled at me. Instead I nodded, foolish, grateful for her company, her cheer, anything other than the ghostly emptiness outside. She placed a brass key in my palm, her hand cold and dry like pressed linen, room 2, up the stairs. Left at the hallway dot, and so I climbed, floorboards groaning under my steps. I unlocked a door into a warm, tidy chamber, bed neatly made, wash basin gleaming, lace curtains drifting. For the first time in days, I put down my heavy pack and let out the relieved sigh of a man believing in shelter. But the moment I glanced from the window, my stomach flinched. No streets stretched below. No town. Just wilderness, alder forest crammed right to the glass, branches tapping faintly as though they wanted in. I should have left right then, but exhaustion weighed me down heavier than suspicion. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old mildew, an odd combination, sweet but stale, like perfume trapped too long in a trunk. I rubbed my temples. How could an entire furnished hotel exist where history swore none stood? Perhaps I was delirious, imagining things after too many days hiking alone. Still, when I shut the curtains and lay down, it felt real. Too real. The bed sagged comfortably, springs creaking as though remembering hundreds of tired miners before me. My eyelids slid down heavy, but soon the building began to show its true life. Footsteps. At first faint below, then in the hallway quiet shuffles, as though many people walked barefoot across boards. I shot upright, pulse searing. Had hikers followed me? Historians restoring the place? But no shadow moved under the door, and no muffled voices accompanied the steps. Only pacing. I pressed my ear close. Scratch, scratch, a sound like fingernails or maybe bone trailing along the wood. Then a murmur seeped through the keyhole, words whispered too softly to shape. But close enough I swore someone knelt right outside my room, coaxing me nearer. Come out, the whisper bled at last, breath frosting the brass. Rooms are so hard to fill. Don't leave. I staggered back, sweat splitting cold down my spine. My flashlight beam darted the corners, but no gaps, no hidden doors. Only that single locked entry I'd come through. Minutes bled into hours. The whispers grew scattered, then multiplied, overlapping like a house half full of guests murmuring behind doors, but none opened. None slammed, only whispers stacking one atop another. Then my bed shifted, not just the springs, but the entire frame tilted violently as though some great hand seized it from below. I clung instinctively, stammering breath shredding out of me. The mattress buckled, tearing seams, until, in one convulsive shudder, the entire bed broke inward. It wasn't the floor beneath that opened, it was a void. A gaping hole where no earth should swallow. Blackness with glurs of skeletal hands. They tore out, snapping at my ankles, clutching higher against my legs, icy fingers yanking with terrifying greed. Their jaws craned upward, teeth biting air in soundless screams. I shrieked, crashed into the knitstand, flashlight pounding against the wall. For one drawn breath I glimpsed faces below sunken, eyeless, twisted around in agony as though the floorboards had digested them long years ago. And they fought to pull me down to join. The wash basin shattered as I kicked backward, scrambling on splinters until my head cracked against the wall. Stars danced. My vision went dark. When my eyes cleared, there was no room. No bed, no whispers. Only moss. I woke curled against the forest floor. Damp grass plastered against my cheek. Dawn shivering its first pale light through alder branches. Morning, freezing dew soaked my clothes. My backpack was slumped against the stump, half unzipped as though I'd never laid it down inside any warm chamber. There was no trace of walls, no roof above, only Daya's ruins. Quiet, rotten, unchanged. And yet something new sat heavy against my ribs. I fished clumsily inside my jacket pocket. There it was, a small, leather-bound notebook. A ledger. The kind guest registers used to keep. Its cover was brittle, cracking under my grip. When I opened, the pages swelled with mildewed ink. My eyes traced names, neat cursive loops one after another. William Cassidy, 1899, Louise Meyer, 1901. Charles Ehud, 1903. Columns of travelers decades long gone. Some pages blotted into stains where names drowned. Unreadable in water, but one page near the back was clear, and there was my name. Written in the same delicate script, I snapped the book shut so fast dust puffed. My heart felt like it would explode straight through my ribs. No rational explanation unspooled in my mind. If I had hallucinated the entire hotel, why this artifact? If someone had played tricks on me, why embed the joke with names of travelers whose bones moldered in this wilderness? Why mine? I staggered until I met my friends later that morning. They laughed, teased me for looking pale, thought I had simply overexerted. I let them believe it. I burned to tell them about the hotel, about the bed collapsing into a hungry pit, about skeletal arms clawing my existence into their numbers. But their laughter reminded me, some truths are too venomous to pass along. That ledger, I hid it away. To this day I haven't destroyed it. Some nights, when I'm fool enough to pull it from the trunk, I swear the pages turn on their own. New names bloom in ink I cannot trace. I know what Daya is. It isn't a ghost town in the way people think. The park rangers and historians call it vanished. But I saw its hotels still welcoming guests, even if its rooms don't exactly let them leave, if you ever hike out past Skagway alone. Beware the trail into Daya. If you see lamplight flickering where moss should reign, run. Run like your name depends on it. Because if the hotel finds you, it will write you into its accounts. And once you're in the ledger, I don't think there's ever truly a checkout. They sent me out to Nantiinaq the first summer I worked ranger patrol in Wrangell St. Elias at 27. Fresh from Anchorage, I thought I was built for wilderness work, broad shoulders, decent stamina, willing to camp weeks alone. I didn't know the backcountry feeds on pride. That some valleys aren't just empty, they're waiting. Nantiinaq is one of those places. The town had been a mining camp in the early 1900s before the copper rush collapsed. By then, Kennecott had stripped the mountains bare, and Nantiinaq was left half-built, half abandoned, its shacks clawed down gradually by snow. On maps now, it's labeled as ruins. But you need boots in the mud to feel how wrong the earth there sits. My assignment was simple. Document old structures. Mark hazards, make safety notes for possible guided treks. I hiked in with a pack heavy with survey tools and a mind dismissive of the whispers an older ranger had muttered before I departed. Don't linger by the shafts. Listen if you want, but don't answer. By late day I stood at the mouth of the largest shaft, its timbers yawning, ice fangs dripping along the roof. Birds, which should have been raucous in July, fell silent the moment I stepped near. Even insects seemed absent. The quiet pressed on me until I almost welcomed the gust that whistled from the cavern, but it wasn't just wind. It was a voice. At first, carried faint on the draft like a human moan. I stood, pulse pounding, half expecting to see another hiker down there. The wind shifted, and suddenly it wasn't one voice, it was many. Muffled wails echoing off rock until the shaft vibrated with grief. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I told myself it had to be air currents cutting through old beams, a natural ventriloquism. Yet the more I listened, the less random the cries became. Words seemed to reach me, syllables too frayed to understand but arranged in cadence like pleading. Then came the moment that unraveled my skepticism completely. A single scream high, raw, terrified, ripped from deep inside. Not the wind, not imagination. It clawed up the walls and poured out of the shaft, stabbing through my ears with such force I stumbled back onto the soil. That scream didn't fade quickly. It lingered, echoing strange, carrying pain human ears instinctively recognize. I had heard dying men on search and rescue mishaps before, but never anything this shrieking. This bottomless, shaking, I set camp 100 yards away, determined to write it off to the mountain playing tricks. But already, when the light dimmed and the night cold snuck low, I knew something was alive beneath Nantiinaq, and it wasn't just alive. It was calling. Sleep abandoned me. Every time I drifted near it, the sounds stirred again, groaning, keening. Soon they weren't distant. They were around me, threading through alder, vibrating under soil. I clutched my sleeping bag and realized I couldn't ignore it. I had to see. I returned to the shaft with my lamp at midnight. The frame leaned like rotten teeth, but the tunnel gaped. A stair path once built by miners had collapsed mostly, leaving a steep decline littered with splinters and rails. The cries drifted rawer now. Definite voices tangled together, men cursing, others begging. Some howling and laughter so manic it froze my blood. I lowered myself inside. One boot sliding, then the next shuddering onto broken timber. My lamp cut a pale cone forward, revealing rusted helmets, abandoned tools strewn like men had flung them in panic and fled. But the air. It wasn't frigid. It was warm. Unnaturally warm, like breath puffing from unseen lungs against my cheek dot as I crept. Whispers tightened in clarity. "Help! We're here! Down below!" Each phrase bled over the next until they tangled into a chorus demanding me forward. I told myself sound can play tricks in caverns. Yet with every step I swore those voices knew me. They hissed my own name, once clear, searing. The tunnel twisted until my lamp licked against the most horrifying sight of my life. Faces, not carved statues. Not graffiti sketched by pranksters. Real human faces pressed into the rock walls themselves. Dozens at first, then hundreds as my lamp spread. Their eyes and mouths gaped open, mid-scream, stone swallowing them whole up to the nose or cheek or chin. But they moved. Tiny shifts, lips quivering in rasps. Their eyes rolled white in agony. Some twisted against their unyielding cage of stone. Neck tendons straining, the realization hit with a gut-sick punch. The voices weren't just echoing, they were leaking from these faces. The mine hadn't only collapsed on men. The mine had kept them, entombed yet animate, punished in endless suffocation. One, nearest me, drew my lamp into its gaze. Its lips cracked against grit, drafting two ragged syllables. Save. U.S. The air swelled hot against my skin. The ground trembled faintly. And suddenly, every trapped face turned their milky eyes toward me in perfect unison. I bolted. Rails screamed underfoot. The crying and laughter magnified until it filled my skull like knives. Arms clawed out of stone briefly, claw tips scraping sparks, before snapping back like the rock resorbed them. I tripped, smacked shoulder to wall, felt hot fingers graze my jacket, then spilled free against the night, outside silence. Only my own sobs trembling air, but the shaft pulsed faintly. As if holding breath for another scream, I staggered miles before daring to look back, shouldering pack straps that felt like anchors. I should have radioed in. But I knew what the higher-ups would say. Sounds, echoes, overtired imagination. And maybe I could have swallowed that excuse, if not for what followed me home nights after leaving Nantiinaq. When I bedded in ranger cabins or returned to Anchorage, the noises never stopped. Not faint memories. Clear as though the shaft now nested beneath my own floorboards. Screams rising, fading, building again in waves. Just before sleep always, when my defenses dropped, a single voice elbowed through the chaos. Mine, my own voice crying out for help. As if some version of me already lay trapped there in the walls, I told myself not to listen. But denial burned away when nightmares grew strong. I'd dream of lying still in bed, unable to move, and faces would bulge through the ceiling plaster just like stone eyes wide. Lips straining until they dripped warm dust down upon me. I quit ranger service not long after. Officially, family reasons. Truthfully, I couldn't risk another patrol assignment near shafts. Not after Nantiinaq. Because whatever breath rides those tunnels, it doesn't just live there. It follows. Once you've heard those screams, you carry them forever. To this day, I sometimes wake with my hands bleeding from clutch marks I don't remember. Some mornings, grit lines my sheets. Coppery dust, warm to the touch. I've tried to throw away that gear, to burn clothing, to move houses. Nothing stops it. The older ranger's warning rings too late now. Don't linger. Don't answer. But I listened. I crept in where I wasn't wanted. I let the voices into my ear, and so I believe the truth is simple. Nantiinaq isn't just a defunct mine. It's a throat. A living earth gullet that swallowed greedy men a century ago and didn't stop hungry. It crushes bodies, yes, but it keeps voices alive, a harvest of souls clawing eternally inside granite. That noise beneath isn't fading with time. It's growing. Each scream louder, closer, clearer. What if the mind isn't just collecting? What if it's waiting until enough voices pile onto one another to split the earth open entirely? If you hear it, and God forbid you do, don't investigate. Don't follow the cries. Leave them in the blackness where they belong. Because once you look into those faces, once you stop to listen, that's when you become another scream in Nantiinaq's walls, and Nantiinaq never lets its choir lose a voice. I worked the Alaska Railroad through the 1970s and into the 80s, long before the tourist cars with glass ceilings made it glamorous. Back then, it was freight first, passengers second, and survival always. Anchorage to Fairbanks runs, Anchorage to Seward, sometimes pushing through snowdrifts so high you couldn't see sky. You learn that the rails carry more than cargo. Out here they carry silence. And occasionally something else. The story I never put on record happened one night around the old ghost town of Curry. Once a proud hotel and depot stop along the Susitna River. In the 1920s it thrived as a halfway luxury resort for travelers' grand dining rooms. Warm beds, a stop where tourists dangled toes in the river. But a fire in 1926 gutted the pride of it. Rebuilt, redesigned, it staggered along until the 1950s when progress came elsewhere and Curry became a shell. Only scrap metal, rotting timbers, and memories left to watch the passing trains. We rarely slowed near Curry anymore. But that night in late winter, heading north with a string of freight cars, I swear something made me take the throttle back. The fog rolling off the Susitna pressed low, smoke white and heavy. The headlight beam painted little more than streaks. The rails clanged like hollow bones. Then I saw them, a group of people waiting on the icy platform. Not one or two hikers lost. Not drunk locals stumbling home, but a crowd 24 at least. Men in coats too thin for Alaska nights, women clutching carpet bags, children in short jackets. Their shapes blurred inside the fog, but their stillness was undeniable. They didn't stamp their feet. They didn't call out. They just stood in neat lines, staring at the train easing close. I threw the whistle for warning. The figures didn't flinch. Protocol said never to stop where no station remained. But the sight twisted my nerves. Families huddled like they'd been waiting all night. Against my better sense, I braked. The cars groaned, slowing until the lead engine hushed before the platform. The doors on the passenger car clanged open by themselves. Air pistons wheezing out a metallic sigh. And those people began to board. One by one, they climbed into the cars. Their faces still blank, their bodies stiff, their silence pressing to my bones. Each passenger sharpened the air with chill as if they dragged the Susitna fog in their coats. By count of boots thudding, at least 2 carloads filled, but when I glanced back outside, no footprints scarred the snow. As the last of them boarded. The air dropped like we'd driven straight into the Arctic Circle. I wiped frost from the inside of the cab glass, breath puff foggier than the engine steam. Every hair on my neck snapped upright. I could hear the murmur from the passenger cars behind. Not the chatter of regular travelers, but hushed repetitions, syllables hard to place. They weren't laughing children or drowsy families. It was prayer or lament or something nearer to names being recited one after another. I left the engine in the hands of my brakeman, walked back to check with lantern. Pushing through the swaying cars, I expected rows of weary people. But each time my light passed a bench, the shapes slouched there, blurred out of focus. My eyes refused to settle. One moment man, next pale vapor clutching knees. Still, the weight of them was real. The cars sagged under their numbers. Frost rimed the windows where they sat closest. A woman turned toward me fully, and that is what shredded my calm. Her skin was near gray, lips moving in a whisper I could almost hear inside my own skull. One phrase repeated, "Next stop's ours. Don't follow." Her eyes, dusky, unfocused, lifted and stared through me like glass. A cold stiffness radiated off her grip when she pressed a hand against my sleeve. The pressure was immense for a moment, sharp like claws, until she withdrew. My jacket bore a frost-stained outline of her. And even after she slipped away among the others, I staggered back toward the front lantern, quaking. Each bench whispered as I passed, waves of names swimming my ears. McCarthy, James, Louisa, Edward, none mine. Some maybe old? The chant collided together like a memorial gone wild. By the time I reached the cab again, my brakeman was pale. He'd heard it too. The cars had begun to rock, not from rail shift, but from movement inside. Rising and falling together like a tide, I pulled throttle, eager only to be moving again. The train growled northward, steel wheels sparking. But the cold remained, worse than any snow tunnel, frost biting into knuckles. My gauges flickered strangely, hands swinging though the mechanics ran fine. Behind, the murmuring rose like surf nearing breaker, the next miles blurred as lanterns flickered between the ridges. My head ached in rhythm with the chant. All I wanted was to reach the next junction where lights existed, where human voices would seem real again, but the longer they rode, the more I understood. These weren't passengers traveling for scenery. They weren't going anywhere except to one specific stop. And we were drawing near. We came into a shallow curve beside the frozen flats, and I braked down hard. Something, instinct, dread? A command whispered from that woman's dead mouth guided me. The train groaned to its slowest roll. Inside the cars, the swell of voices peaked. Every rider stood as one. For a breath, they faced the doors together like soldiers waiting release. Then, without me or the brakeman touching controls, the doors whooshed open, fog yawned in, spilling white sheets across the benches. And those passengers, DISEMBARKED. One after another, they collapsed into the mist. They didn't step so much as fold, their shapes bleeding away from edges inward until nothing remained. Families vanished whole, mothers clutching children, men with bags. All erased into air. The weight left the cars at once. Windows cleared. Temperature rose. Silence thundered across the train until only the trucks rattled steel. My ears rang from the goneness as if absorbing a vacuum. We looked back. The platform was gone. Curry had never been here. It had died miles earlier. All that exited the cars now lay only as swirls in fog dispersing across tundra. Then I felt it. My sleeve burned. I ripped back cloth to reveal a welt where the woman had gripped me earlier. The mark blistered faint like frostbite, but it was shaped wrong. Bony, elongated, each ridge more skeletal than human. That scar never healed right. We didn't speak much the rest of the trip. At the junction, official logs showed no entries about passengers. We recorded only freight delivery. What was there to explain? Who would believe us? But in years after, when rail fans talk about Curry as just another charming ruin, I have to bite back truth. The fire that gutted its hotel may have driven the headlines, but that isn't why Curry is hollow. The place doesn't stand empty. It runs full-on ghost schedules. On passengers who climb platforms no one else can see, traveling no routes except the final one, sometimes even now, retired, living far from those rails, nights catch me off guard. The wind mimics the whistle call. My house pops with frost shift. And suddenly I am sure I hear names murmured beyond the wall rolling. Repeating, I pray those trains keep their course far from the living. Because once they stop for you, inevitably, you must ride too, and the warning still smolders from that woman's dead lips, etched forever in my arm. Next stop's ours. Don't follow. I was an anthropologist by trade. Alaska was my lifelong study, its people, its history, its bones buried in frost. That was how I wound up on Yukavok Island, a desolate hunk of rock battered by the Bering Sea, home once to the village of King Island. A stilted community now long abandoned, the village clung like barnacles to the cliff face. Spindly-legged houses built by the Inupiat who lived impossibly there for centuries. Children once scaled cliffs like spiders daily, ropes tied to their waists, hunting birds and eggs from dizzying perches. But when relocation orders and modern life drained the island decades ago, Yukavok fell to silence. Stilt homes snapped, beams bowed. The village skeleton creaked on the edge of a vertical graveyard. I arrived one late summer, chasing what I thought was only research. My colleagues turned back on weather warnings, but I was stubborn, setting foot on those cliffs with only gear and notebooks. The silence here wasn't just absence, it was smothering. Wind howled around peaks, surf cracked rock, but between the vacuum of laughter. These cliffs were supposed to ring with it once, children laughing as they chased gulls. That's why the sound struck me so deeply. I first heard it while documenting carvings in a shattered dwelling. Light waned against cold sky when faint noises floated down the rock face. Giggling. Clear, sprightly giggles above where no foot fell for 50 years. I froze my pen in mid-note. Gulls? The wind? Impossible howls shaping into mirth? My logic fought, but the cadence was too exact, high, childlike, joyous. More followed. Pattering like many tiny feet scampering against beams, scrambling across cliff planks. No houses stood whole enough to hold them, yet weight seemed to press on timbers. I stepped out onto the shattered ledge and stared upward. At first I saw nothing, only waving gull wings. But when clouds split to the dim sun, shadows crept along the heights. Dozens of small figures darting, climbing impossible rock faces where no human grip could hold. Their shapes bent, stretched, limbs moving almost insectal, children, yet not. Their limbs elongated, heads tilted wrong with eyeless sockets too wide. Their laughter pitched between joy and shriek. Dancing across stone and my spine alike, I stumbled back, muttering that I was overtired, that sound warped in wind tunnels. Yet every nerve insisted otherwise. And when a pebble bounced down against my hood, I looked up into the grinning hollow sockets of a pale face, peering straight over the ledge. The village wasn't empty at all. The face withdrew quickly, its absence almost worse than its presence. My breaths fell ragged and hot from fear, each pulse racing louder than the surf below. Reason and training begged me to record observations, to anchor myself in data. But my instinct shrieked the truth. Those weren't birds, weren't tricks. Something lived clinging to Yukavok still. I made for safer ground, weaving across deteriorated planks lashed into stilt beams thick as telephone poles. The beams once held the homes of dozens of families. Now they stood crooked, brittle, swaying against gusts. Climbing down them was perilous, but staying put felt impossible. The laughter followed. Always above, circling, echoing. At twilight, wind dropped eerie still. And that's when they came closer. At first, scampering over beams like a chorus line of nightmares. Small bodies, pale and shining against dusk. They crawled forward on both hands and feet, but their motions shook too fast, too jagged. Twitching limbs that bent at angles crueler than any child's play. Their mouths hung open too wide, laughter bubbling like water through pipes. Overlapping higher and sharper until it grated in my skull. One scurried across a beam horizontal to me. My light caught its body enough to see shrunken torso, bare and starved, but no eyes existed. Just sockets that wept black streams down gray cheeks. Its teeth gnashed fast, clicking against one another, sparks of saliva spraying into wind. Even without eyes it turned right toward me. And the laughter pitched to a shriek just for me. Weight shook the planks underfoot. Dozens gathered now, twitching, surrounding. Every beam hummed with their crawl. Shadows darted between houses collapsing into sea. Others clung upright against cliff like spiders. Hair whipping in storm gusts, I stumbled into one surviving home for cover, barricading the rotted door with my pack. The laughter didn't dim. It multiplied, swelling around in stereo until it filled my skull. Scratches screeched down the door like claws dragging wood fibers loose. Light flickered in my lantern. I pressed my back against cold wall, praying beams would hold. The whispers started, then layered beneath laughter, pressing straight through timber. Play. Come play. I mustered courage to peer from cracked yawning window. The children had gathered just beyond. 20 pairs of eyeless sockets aiming in stillness, hung bodies swaying with each gust. Their mouths opened in eerie unison. The sound burst outward again. Harmonized giggling morphing to scream, and I knew I had become their next game. No human voice could compete with that laughter. Each shriek frayed my sanity, twisting through marrow until I wondered if my own nerves tremored sounds they fed from. But instinct shoved me escape. I hurled my pack aside, burst through the door. For a breath, The children parted like theater curtains, then closed. Dozens lunged at me on all fours, hands clawing. Their fingers were too sharp, too bony. Wrapping beams and boards, I ran across rotting planks, each step creaking with betrayal, each crack threatening a plunge into black ocean smashing below. The children clambered along beams beside me, heads jerking, laughter spitting sharp. Their movements were too fast, too smooth for creatures that starved, blurs, gray limbs spidering across wood. Jumping gaps too vast for gravity to forgive, one dropped from above. Landing on plank inches before me, it crouched low, head tilting full side like a rag doll. The sockets shone darker than night. A grin ripped too wide split its face, teeth serrated, vibrating. Its sound doubled the shriek in my ears. I screamed raw and hurled into it, shoulder first. The body cracked hollow as driftwood and splintered away, not into flesh, but into a spray of black dust that smoked against the fog. But laughter behind swelled, joyous, unfair, like it was nothing but a round one in their game, dot by miracle or madness. I pitched myself down onto beach rock. The slope battered my knees bloody, but ocean foam lashed cold, awakening against me. When I clambered safe, the cliffs towered. And those pale shapes lying there, dozens of them, staring down. No voices now. No laughter. Just their heads tilting in chilling synchrony. When the storm broke enough, I fled by boat. Back in Anchorage, I tried to retell it to colleagues. None quite believed, though some older Inupiat nodded silently, refusing to speak details. They only said the children of Yukavok had never truly left. That sometimes hunger twists spirits into echoes, laughter scorched into cliffs. Years on, I still dream them. Not silent, but racing toward me on ceilings, their touch scraping as breathless laughter fills the room. Worse, recordings from that night, which I kept like an academic coward, bleed faint giggles from speakers whenever replayed. My own equipment picks up laughter that wasn't present, creeping behind my voice. Don't chase Yukavok. Don't climb those cliffs. The children still cling there, eyeless yet watching, eager to play with any who wander too close, and their games never end until you're laughing with them. Fly the interior long enough, night becomes a kind of partner. You learn its tells. The way the aurora shifts from curtains to snakes when the wind aloft stiffens. How sound carries across a frozen river bar like it's traveling a wire. How your own breath can frost a gauge just enough to hide a needle you needed yesterday. That night February, a few years back, I had my battered Cessna 185 pointed north out of Fairbanks. Full fuel, survival kit packed right, and the guard frequency turned up on the second radio like I always do. 121.5 is the Costi stethoscope on the sky. It's also where Alaska keeps its ghosts. I'm old school with upgrades. The 185's panel is two eras married badly steamed gauges holding court, next to a chunk of glass set in like a guilt offering. The autopilot works most weeks and swears at me the rest. She's got Tundra tires that make gravel strips feel like pavement and enough quirks that I pat the glare shield when we nail a short field landing. I've flown her into Bettles, Nantiinaq Pass, Coldfoot, Umiat, hauled groceries, spark plugs, a sled, a dog that hated me on sight. And one mechanic who didn't. It was supposed to be a boring winter run. Fairbanks to Bettles. Maybe tag Nantiinaq for a pickup if the ceiling held. The forecast said smooth. The thermometer said, keep your mittens on. I climbed to a reasonable altitude to stay beneath a sag of high cloud dragon lace across the brooks. The stars were cold, steady points above that. The aurora was a tired ribbon, green fading toward gray. My engine sounded like it wanted to be home early. The interior was a black quilt below, river ice braided like scars the moon forgot to light. My hand fell on the guard knob the way your hand finds the coffee mug on a familiar desk. Habit, safety, companionship. I tell myself. It's about good airmanship. But it's also about not being the only voice breathing out there. About 80 miles north of Fairbanks. Guard woke up. Mayday, mayday. Mayday, November 7342, Delta losing, altitude losing. A woman's voice. Not broadcast loud, just close. Calm in the brittle way of voices when it's got one more thing to do and no more time. Behind the words, I heard a prop disc chewing air without the authority it needs. That sound has a flavor: metal, stress, distance. I thumbed my PTT, 7-3-4-2 Delta. This is Cessna 185 north of the Yukon. Say position and souls on board. My heart rate didn't spike. It dropped. When something real hits, the body gets quiet so the brain can do math. Silence. Not the dead kind. Guard always hisses in winter, but silence without reply. I wrote the tail number on my knee pad, the pencil squeaking because my gloves stole subtlety from my fingers. Then, guard again. Mountain ice. The voice clipped off like a hand had smacked the mic. Anyone, and gone. I looked at my DSB like it owed me money. No 7,700 squawk, no N7342D anywhere near me. Anchorage Center answered when I called, took the tail number, my approximate position, and the few broken words I had. They told me they'd notify RCC and asked if I could get a line on the aircraft. I said I'd try. What else do you say? And eased a shallow turn to the east to put me toward terrain where a mountain call would make sense. If you haven't flown up here, there's a thing radios do in cold air with charged skies. Voices bounce. They slither under inversions, get picked up by rocks, arrive like a memory you didn't make. I told myself I was hearing a call from way down on the Kuskokwim or way out toward McGrath. I told myself to hold my line, to not go sight, seeing in the black, but when you hear losing altitude, some ancient part of you goes hunting. I dropped a couple 100 feet to slide under a ragged shelf of cloud trying to drag its belly across the ridges like a dirty curtain. The brooks were ahead, a dark wolfback on the horizon. The wind aloft had no teeth yet. My headlamp made my pencil look too white when I checked the ETA. Scrawl on my pad. Then I saw a runway. It didn't appear like lights. It presented like a memory of lights. Two parallel lines of darker snow with a slight crown between wheel berms slumped into rounded whales. At the far end, shapes against starless black that read as Quonset huts and a small tower to a brain desperate to pin sense to shadow. No strobes. No Vasi, no beacons. Yet my eyes believed. Bettles traffic, Cessna 85, 5 miles south on Final 4. I stopped mid-call. This wasn't Bettles. I didn't know what it was. Guard hissed. I dropped a notch of flaps anyway and bent the 185 into a tight base. Nose pointed at a strip only my instincts accepted. Night illusions are a religion up here. The first commandment, thou shalt know the runway before you land. I broke the rules. Final came fast because the world was small and my landing light made it smaller. The beam painted texture wine-detched lines, drifts with crisp cornices, shadows that moved when my angle changed. The tires touched, chattered once, then bit something hard underneath. The landing felt right in my bones, which is the worst part. False things that feel right are how people die in winter. The engine ticked when I pulled the throttle back, a small knocking that always makes the hair on my arms rise. The shapes at the end of the strip hunched like big animals with their backs to the wind. I taxied toward them, holding the tail with brakes and breath. The smell came in faint at first: old avgas and gear oil, canvas, a hint of cigarette in a place no one smoked in decades. Not wood smoke. Not the human smell that says, someone lives here. I shut down, the prop swinging to a stop with a polite clink, and sat with my hand on the yoke longer than I needed to. The aurora overhead dimmed as if a curtain were being pulled not by wind but by decision. Cold pressed against the windows like an audience leaning in. I unlatched, stepped down onto snow that squeaked with that high, murderous pitch, and felt the kind of cold that feels older than you are, the field that wasn't people who don't fly think the scariest. Paw is the engine noise. The scariest part is how fast quiet gets inside you when it shouldn't. Out there, stepping away from my little island of aluminum, the quiet was a pressure. No dogs, no wind through spruce. No aura crackle. Just my own fabric swish and the distant tick of cooling metal. Up close, the Quonset huts were ribs and memory. Snowdrifts hardened into vaulted shapes around collapsed arches. I ran my glove over a half-buried sheet of corrugated, brittle with cold. A metal sign lay canted where a door might have been, letters eaten away until only a ghost of US and something like E-Field scratched through the rust. The kind of World War II leftover you find half remembered by maps and men. One of the Lend-Lease spines. The old-timers still toast with coffee that tastes like gear lube got inside the shell of the biggest arch. Smell bloomed thicker, cigarette ghost. Cold steel, paint that remembered being new. Snow lay in a low drift against a fallen bench, the crust shining like mica in my headlamp. In the far corner, a tarp lumped over a shape that resembled a radial engine enough to make your brain supply cylinders. I stood there with my breath fogging my own beam and told myself I was looking at advanced decay and wishful pattern making. Guard sizzled on my handheld. I hadn't turned the handheld on. I bring it, clip it to my vest out of reflex, a backup for the backup. I was saving the battery for when I needed it. The screen was dark. The knob was pointed at off. Still, from the dead speaker inches from my chest, came that same voice. Left base, left. The tone wasn't a generic emergency anymore. It was flight deck, normal voice trying to stay professional, with fear on a short leash. Then, oh God, it didn't scream. It dropped. I looked down at the radio like I was supposed to say something to it and couldn't remember my lines. Frost bit under my scarf where my jaw clenched. Something thudded outside metal on metal, a hollow, familiar thump, a boot finding the step of my 185. I didn't run back. It was more a controlled non-panic that covered the ground too quickly. The sky had come in a couple inches since I landed. It does that up here, dropping the lid lower when you're not looking. The 185 sat with her spinner, pointed like a compass at the dark. My landing light off now so the shadows could make their own rules. The pilot door was closed. The passenger door on the far side was resting against its latch, open 2 inches like a breath caught in a throat. When I got there, the door moved in a way that looked human. Not a gust. The slow, thoughtless pull of somebody tired who expects the latch to catch. I jerked it open. The cockpit was empty. My seat cushion was warm through the layers, the kind of warmth that could be explained by adrenaline and a body that had just vacated. But on the inside of the windscreen, there were 2 crescents of frost exactly where someone's breath would bloom if they were leaning forward, hands tight on the top of the yoke. The hair on my neck went to needles. I said, okay, to nobody. Calm because there was only one sane choice left and it involved leaving, I cracked mixture, primed like I meant it, hit the starter. The engine didn't want to. The starter motor made a long, complaining sound that reminded me of kids past their bedtime. On the 3rd try, the prop caught and wavered into life, exhaust spitting crystals that glittered and fell like a snow of sparks around the wheel pants. I taxied down my own tracks, my one proof that the world still had cause and effect, lined up. I added power slowly, felt the tail start to rise, gave a whisper of right rudder out of habit. The landing light painted my path, and for the first 50 yards, it looked as good as a thing that should not exist can look. Then the light swung over an edge and everything I thought was runway ended in a dark absence. That wasn't dark ground dotted, it was water. An open lead punched through the river ice below the bluff of a long, flat, hard bar. My strip hadn't been a strip. It had been a shelf. The river had eaten out under the far end. The open lead wasn't wide, but wide has different meanings in a plane. Doing 40 knots in deep cold, I didn't have time to say anything clever. I dumped flaps to the stop, tugged, let the engine find a couple hundred more RPM by hope if not physics. And the 185 did what she was built to do because I asked her right. The tires kissed the far lip of the shelf with a rubber-on-ice squeal I felt in my back teeth, and then we were over black water that looked like a hole in the sky. The plane climbed through sudden quiet like we'd flown into wool. Mayday, I said on guard because offering something back felt like a pact. Unknown river bar north of the Yukon, possible old military site. Single aircraft departing, no distress. Recommend caution. My voice sounded like mine. Then, half a beat later, my voice came back thin and delayed as if someone had recorded me and played it over a cheap speaker in the hangar of my skull. You're not supposed to be there. I banked without thinking. The world below was a flat book of snow pages, everything written in white, edges defined by shadow and guessing. From 1,000 feet, the field I'd used looked like any of 100 folds on 100 rivers. No huts, no ribs. No signs, just the memory of a choice. The ride to Bettles took half my life in 10 minutes. The ceiling came down a fist-width more, but the air stayed kind. Bettles is a comfort when the rest of the world is a dare. I called in like a man in church and landed like a sinner glad to have the chance. My mechanic old friend. Too many winters and still all his fingers walked out without a hat, which is how I knew he'd been waiting for something to go wrong. He put his hand on the cowl the way you soothe a horse, cheek near aluminum. Then he crouched, thumbed the trailing edge of one blade and frowned like the sky had insulted him. "You pick up ice?" he asked. "No, then what's this?" Thin, parallel scratches climbed an inch up from the trailing edge. 4 lines together, then a gap, then another 4. Not deep enough to catch a fingernail. I won't say the thing my brain supplied because I'm not the kind of fool who opens doors with words, but you can do the arithmetic. He ran his glove over them again like maybe they'd pretend to be something else if he was gentle. We tucked her in the hangar. Heat guns on the cylinders, blankets, the ritual. He checked plugs, coughed at the mixture cable, listened to the mags like a doctor to a chest. Nothing wrong. My panel clock, though, had a blank 40 minutes where it hadn't ticked. The GPS breadcrumb trail my comfort and curse showed a clean ruler line from where I left the magenta to where I entered the pattern at Bettles. No little open mouth in the course where I'd turned base. No circle where I'd gotten curious. It was as if I'd flown like a good boy the whole time. We didn't talk about that. We drank coffee that scraped my throat and watched Aurora soft shoe behind low cloud. Sleep at Bettles. Even the warm kind has edges. I woke twice with the feeling of a nose over a drop. The little belly hitch of a stall that wasn't, the next morning, with light that felt half-hearted coming through. I called a friend in Fairbanks who has that specific gift of knowing where to look. Give her a tail number and a problem, and she give you an obituary and a map. She called back in an hour and change, voice slower than usual. "There was an N7342D, she said. Cessna 206, not a 185. No survivors officially declared because there were no remains officially found. Went missing on a Kuskokwim run in 1979. Pilot male. Passenger female." She read me a few lines of an article like the words still had rust on them. Weather was good, forecast was dull. Like yours. The voice I heard did not sound 1979. I know, that's meaningless. Radio's shave time off.